I still remember the sound of his laugh echoing in that courtroom. Michael sat across from me at the long oak table, leaning back in his chair, as if this divorce hearing were nothing more than a formality. He smirked at his lawyer, whispered something under his breath, and chuckled like he already knew how this would end. 6 years of marriage had taught me one thing about Michael: he loved to win. To him, this wasn't about the end of our relationship. It was about proving that he was right, that I was weak, and that leaving him meant I would crawl back one day, begging for help. The judge shuffled through our files. My attorney sat calmly beside me, while my hands gripped the edge of the table, so tightly my knuckles turned white. I reminded myself to breathe. Michael had always called me the naive small-town girl, as though my background from Tennessee made me incapable of achieving anything without him. He had no idea that every late night he claimed to be working at the office gave me the chance to build a life of my own. When he laughed again, I turned my head slowly and looked him straight in the eye. He thought I had nothing. He thought this divorce would leave me crawling for scraps from his family's wealth. He thought wrong. The judge cleared his throat. We'll now review the financial disclosures of both parties. Michael leaned forward, smug as ever. This should be quick, Your Honor. She's got nothing. He had no idea what was about to happen. Michael's confidence was almost unbearable to watch. He leaned on his elbows, one hand adjusting his tie, the other scribbling something on a yellow legal pad, as though he were the one running the show. That smug smile of his had always been my weakness in the early days. It made me feel chosen. Now it only made me sick. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at the folder in front of him. Mr. Shannon, your disclosed financials are as expected: salary from your law firm, joint accounts, and declared assets. Michael gave a little nod, lips curling into a smirk. Yes, Your Honor. As I said, everything is straightforward. He glanced at me, waiting to see the embarrassment on my face. But I stayed still. My heart was pounding, but my face showed nothing. And now, the judge continued, flipping to the next section, Mrs. Shannon's financial disclosures. Michael chuckled before the judge could even read. This will be quick. I thought back to how we first met. I was 22, fresh out of college, working as an accounting assistant. He was a law student in his last year, charming, handsome, the kind of man who filled a room with his presence. I believed he saw something special in me. In reality, he saw someone easy to control. He corrected the way I dressed, told me which friends to keep and which to let go, even criticized how I decorated our home. At first, I mistook it for guidance. But over time, I realized he wasn't building me up. He was chipping away at me until I fit his perfect image of a submissive wife. But what he never understood was this: I listened, I observed, and I learned. While he laughed at my little accounting job, I was quietly studying financial consulting. While he spent money on golf memberships and luxury watches, I invested in the stock market, crypto in the early days, and eventually in real estate. Each decision was calculated, quiet, invisible to him, because he never paid attention unless it was about himself. The judge's voice pulled me back to the present. He cleared his throat. According to these documents, Mrs. Shannon has established and currently operates a financial consulting firm registered under her maiden name. Over the last 4 years, this business has generated consistent revenue. He paused, glancing at Michael, in the 7 figures. Michael's pen dropped onto the table. His smirk faltered for the first time. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers. The judge continued. Additionally, Mrs. Shannon's investments include multiple rental properties in Nashville, a portfolio of stocks, and equity in 2 tech startups. Current net worth is estimated at. He adjusted his glasses again and read the number. Michael blinked rapidly, as if the words were in another language. His lips moved slightly, whispering the number to himself as though he couldn't believe it. I sat there quietly, watching the realization wash over his face. This was the moment I had waited for. All those nights of him mocking me for buying business books, all the times he told me I'd never succeed without him. This was my vindication. The judge looked up. Mr. Shannon, are you aware of your wife's financial situation? Michael stammered. No, Your Honor. She never. He turned to me, eyes blazing. You hid this from me? I raised my chin and spoke for the first time that day. No, Michael. You just never cared enough to ask. The courtroom air grew heavy. His laugh was gone. His arrogance was gone. For the first time in years, I felt taller than him. Stronger. Freer. And this was only the beginning. The silence in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Michael's face had drained of color, his usual cocky expression melting into disbelief. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Michael didn't move. His eyes were glued to me, as if I had just turned into someone he didn't recognize. That was the truth, of course. He didn't know me. He never had. Your Honor, Michael finally found his voice, his tone sharper now. This must be a mistake. My wife, Sarah, she's never had a business. She barely worked part-time when we married. The judge raised an eyebrow and tapped the thick stack of documents in front of him. According to tax records and corporate filings, she not only had a business, but built it into a highly successful consultancy. The numbers speak for themselves, Mr. Shannon. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His tie suddenly looked too tight. He shot me a look that was equal parts fury and confusion. I remembered all those nights when he came home smelling of whiskey and perfume that wasn't mine. All those times he dismissed my passion for finance as a cute hobby. He thought he was the genius in the relationship, the one with all the power. He had no idea that every sneer, every insult, every late-night absence only fueled me to prove him wrong. The judge continued reading. In addition to her consulting firm, Mrs. Shannon's personal investments total over $3 million, including ownership of properties in East Nashville, Germantown, and Franklin. She has diversified holdings in both domestic and international markets. The gasp that escaped Michael's mouth was audible. His lawyer pressed a hand to his arm, trying to calm him down, but it was no use. He was unraveling in front of everyone. Finally, he snapped. This is fraud. She must have hidden money from our marriage. I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. No, Michael. You just assumed I was too stupid, too simple, too small-town to do anything without you. While you were out with your co-workers, I was studying markets. While you mocked me for reading investment books, I was creating strategies. While you spent, I saved. While you cheated, I built. My attorney placed a hand gently on mine, signaling for me to stop, but I didn't. The words poured out, years of silence breaking in one tidal wave. You laughed at me for clipping coupons while you blew thousands on watches. You told me my job was pointless while you pretended to work late nights at the firm. You made me feel like nothing. But guess what, Michael? I turned that nothing into more than you'll ever have. The courtroom was frozen. Even the judge seemed momentarily stunned by the force in my voice. Michael, for once, had no comeback. He sat there, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. The judge cleared his throat and continued reading the record as though nothing had happened, but I knew what everyone was thinking. The balance of power had shifted. I wasn't the naive girl anymore. I wasn't his shadow. I wasn't just a wife. I was Sarah, the woman who built an empire in silence. And Michael was about to lose everything he thought he controlled. Michael sat stiffly in his chair, the smug arrogance drained from his face. He looked smaller somehow, like the suit he wore didn't quite fit him anymore. His lawyer shuffled through the disclosure documents with nervous energy, probably wishing he'd asked me a single question before walking into this hearing. The judge leaned back slightly, hands folded. It appears, he said carefully, that Mrs. Shannon has not only established independent wealth, but has also kept her finances entirely separate. The prenuptial agreement signed at the time of marriage, which your counsel submitted, explicitly states that individually earned income remains the sole property of the earner. Meaning? Michael's head snapped up. Meaning what? The judge's gaze was steady. Meaning none of your wife's business income, investments, or assets are subject to division in this divorce. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I could almost feel Michael's ego crumbling. He had walked in expecting to watch me beg for alimony, to relish the thought of me struggling to survive without his money. Instead, he was realizing that not only was I fine without him, I was wealthier than he had ever imagined. He slammed his palm against the table. This is ridiculous. She lied to me for years. I finally turned to him, meeting his glare with calmness I didn't know I possessed. No, Michael, I didn't lie. I just stopped explaining myself to someone who never listened. The courtroom grew tense. A few people shifted in their seats, clearly enjoying the drama. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, whispering something, but Michael shook him off. He wasn't used to losing control. I thought back to the night I decided to finally take my life into my own hands. It was our 3rd anniversary. He had come home late, again, reeking of cologne that wasn't mine. I'd prepared dinner he never touched, candles that burned down to nothing as I sat alone at the table. That night, instead of crying, I pulled out my laptop. I researched business licenses, small loans, market trends. It was the night I chose myself. Now, years later, that choice was being read aloud in court for everyone to hear. Michael's voice broke through my thoughts. "You can't just keep secrets like this in a marriage," he shouted. I leaned slightly forward, my tone sharp but measured. "Secrets, Michael? You want to talk about secrets? Shall we call your co-worker Amanda to testify about those business trips that never existed?" The color drained from his face. His lawyer nearly choked on his own breath. The judge slammed his gavel lightly. "That's enough. We will not turn this hearing into a shouting match. The financial disclosures are clear. The law is clear. Mrs. Shannon's assets remain hers alone." Michael collapsed back into his chair, his laugh completely gone. For the first time, I saw what he truly was without the bravado, small, bitter, exposed. And inside me, something shifted. I wasn't just surviving this divorce. I was winning my freedom. Michael sat in stunned silence, but I could see his mind working furiously behind his eyes. He was scrambling, searching for any angle, any argument that could restore the upper hand he had lost so suddenly. His whole identity revolved around being in control, and right now, that control was slipping through his fingers. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Michael's jaw was clenched too tightly to respond. Finally, he muttered through his teeth, "We'll contest this. She must have funneled money away from our joint accounts." The judge didn't even look up from his notes. "Mr. Shannon, I remind you that baseless accusations have no standing here. All accounts have been reviewed. Mrs. Shannon's finances are fully transparent and legally separate." Transparent, legally separate. Those words were sweeter than any vow he had ever spoken to me. I sat straighter in my chair, feeling years of humiliation peeling off like an old, suffocating skin. For 6 years, I had been treated like a burden, an accessory, a pretty little shadow to stand beside him at social events. He paraded me around as the wife from good stock, but never an equal. And yet, while he underestimated me, I built something greater than he could ever imagine. "Sarah," Michael hissed under his breath, leaning slightly toward me. "How could you do this to me?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I didn't do this to you. I did it for me." His face twisted, a mixture of rage and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend a world where I existed outside of him, where my accomplishments weren't tied to his name. That was always his greatest blind spot. The judge continued outlining the division of assets. Joint property, including the Belmead residence, will be sold and profits divided equally. Vehicles are to be allocated per request. Michael raised his hand suddenly. "Your Honor, the house is mine. It's under my name." The judge looked at him sharply. "The mortgage was paid with joint funds. Therefore, it is subject to division. You know this, Mr. Shannon." Michael's shoulders slumped, but he quickly recovered with a bitter laugh. "So what? She gets half of my house and all of her empire? That's not justice." Finally, I allowed myself a small smile. "No, Michael. That's fairness. Something you never gave me." The words hit him harder than any legal ruling could. He flinched as if I'd slapped him in front of everyone. I remembered the countless times I had begged him just to listen, to support me, to treat me as a partner instead of a possession. He always brushed me off with that same laugh he'd carried into this courtroom, certain that I would never stand up for myself. Now the laugh was gone. The judge shuffled the papers into a neat pile. "This court finds that the division is equitable and final. Unless either party has further evidence, we will proceed to finalize." Michael's lawyer pressed his lips together, defeated. There was nothing left to argue. And me? I sat there breathing in the moment, knowing that I hadn't just won a divorce. I had reclaimed my voice. The judge's words echoed in the room, equitable and final. It was the sound of freedom, and yet Michael couldn't let it go. He leaned forward, palms flat on the table, his voice rising in desperation. "Your Honor, she's deceived me for years. A marriage is supposed to be about honesty. If she was capable of hiding millions from me, what else could she have hidden? The judge didn't flinch. Mr. Shannon, what your wife did was not deception. She managed her own finances legally and independently. Nothing in this court obligates her to share those details with you unless they affect joint accounts, which they do not. Michael's face reddened, his composure unraveling in front of everyone. For a man who prided himself on his reputation, this was the deepest cut. His colleagues, his family, even strangers, if word spread, they'd all know the truth. He wasn't the one in control. I remembered the first time I caught him lying to me. He'd said he was at the firm late, but I saw the charge on our joint card from a restaurant downtown. 2 entrees, 2 drinks. When I asked about it, he laughed in my face. Do you really think I'd waste my time explaining every dinner? That's why men handle money, Sarah. Women just don't get it. That moment had been a turning point. He thought my silence meant defeat, but really it meant strategy. I decided right then that I'd never depend on him again. The judge signed the last document and slid it across the desk. Mrs. Shannon, you are free to go once the clerk finalizes the paperwork. Mr. Shannon, I suggest you take a moment before leaving. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. For a second, no one moved. Michael sat frozen, his knuckles white against the table. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Michael didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on me, sharp with betrayal and fury. You think this is over, he muttered. I stood slowly, gathering my things with deliberate calm. It's been over for a long time, Michael. Today just made it official. As I turned to walk away, he laughed again, but this time it wasn't the confident laugh I'd heard when we first sat down. It was hollow, strained, almost hysterical. I didn't look back. For years, I had carried the weight of his scorn, his control, his arrogance. But as I walked out of that courtroom, heels clicking against the marble floor, I felt lighter than I ever had before. The future I built was mine, entirely mine, and no amount of laughter or bitterness from him could ever take that away. The sun was bright when I stepped out of the courthouse, almost blinding after the heavy air inside. I paused at the top of the stone steps, letting the warmth hit my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't Sarah Shannon, the wife of Michael. I was simply Sarah, and that felt powerful. My attorney joined me, his leather briefcase clicking shut. Congratulations, he said softly. You handled yourself with more grace than most clients ever do. I smiled faintly. Grace wasn't the word I would have chosen. Inside, I had been burning. But I'd learned long ago that fire hidden behind calm eyes is far more dangerous than flames on display. Michael's voice cut through the air behind me. Sarah. I stiffened but didn't turn. My attorney touched my arm. You don't have to engage. But part of me wanted to. Slowly, I turned to see him storming out of the courthouse, his tie loosened, his lawyer chasing after him. His eyes were wild, nothing like the man who once charmed me with smooth confidence. You embarrassed me in there, he spat, loud enough for people nearby to glance our way. Do you know what you've done to my reputation? To my family? I tilted my head, my voice steady. Your reputation isn't my responsibility, Michael. And neither is your family's approval. Not anymore. His jaw clenched. For years, that look would have made me back down, swallow my words, apologize even when I wasn't wrong. But not today. You think you've won, he sneered. You think money makes you better than me? I took a slow step closer, closing the gap between us. No, Michael. Money doesn't make me better. But independence does. Respect does. Freedom does. And those are things you never gave me. For a moment, his expression cracked. Beneath the anger, I saw fear. Not of me, but of the world he could no longer control. He was terrified of being ordinary, of being forgotten. And now, without me to stand silently beside him, he was just another bitter man in a suit. I turned and walked away before he could reply. Each step felt like a declaration. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I expected to feel relief, maybe even triumph. But what surprised me most was the quiet. For years, my head had been filled with his voice, mocking, correcting, belittling. And now there was silence. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. That night, I didn't celebrate with champagne or friends. Instead, I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, the one I had secretly rented months before the divorce, and just breathed. The city lights stretched out in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt like they belonged to me. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the table beside me. Messages from Michael, dozens of them, each more frantic than the last. You blindsided me. We were supposed to be a team. You'll regret humiliating me like that. I scrolled through them without replying. Every word only confirmed what I already knew. He didn't miss me, he missed control. Then another message arrived, different from the rest. Let's talk. Just you and me. No lawyers. I laughed under my breath. Michael had never wanted just me in 6 years of marriage. He wanted a reflection of himself, someone to boost his ego, to stand still while he shined. Now he wanted to negotiate because he finally saw what I was worth. I locked my phone and set it face down. He could stew in his desperation. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the dashboard of my consulting firm. The numbers glowed on the screen, contracts signed, payments cleared, investments growing. Proof of every night I stayed up working while he was out networking. Proof that while he thought I was invisible, I was building something unshakable. I thought of my parents back in Tennessee. Humble people who taught me that every dollar should be respected, that hard work was the only real safety net in this world. They had worried when I married Michael, when I moved into his sleek, cold house, when I tried so hard to fit into a world that looked down on me. They'd been right. I picked up the phone and dialed my mom. When she answered, I didn't tell her about the courtroom drama or Michael's meltdown. I just said, "It's over. I'm free." Her voice cracked with emotion. "We always knew you were stronger than he realized." After the call, I sat back and let the tears come, not of sadness, but of release. For years, I had hidden my strength, my ambition, even my joy, to keep peace in a marriage that was never truly mine. Now the pieces of myself I had buried were returning, one by one. I wasn't just free of Michael. I was free to be me again. The following week, news of our divorce began to ripple through Michael's social circle. Nashville wasn't a small town, but gossip traveled fast in certain circles, especially among lawyers and their polished spouses. I hadn't planned on making my financial life public, but once the judge read my disclosures in court, it was only a matter of time before whispers turned into stories. And in those stories, the roles had flipped. Michael was no longer the accomplished attorney with the perfect wife. He was the man who laughed through his divorce only to discover his naive small-town wife had outbuilt him by miles. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that at his firm's Friday happy hour, he lost his temper when someone joked about asking me for investment tips. That image, the man who once strutted through rooms, now reduced to snapping at colleagues, was a sweeter victory than anything money could buy. But revenge wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was peace. And so, I poured myself into my work openly now, no longer hiding it under my maiden name. I rebranded my firm, put my face on the website, started hosting seminars for young women who wanted to take control of their finances. Every time I stood on stage, microphone in hand, I felt like I was rewriting the story Michael had tried to script for me. One night, after a seminar, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I just wanted to say, hearing your story makes me believe I don't have to stay stuck. My boyfriend always tells me I'll never manage money right. But you proved him wrong." Her words struck me deeper than she could know. For years, I had lived under that same shadow of doubt, that same dismissive tone. To her, I wasn't just a speaker. I was proof. Later, driving home, I realized something. Michael thought my fortune was my revenge. But it wasn't. My true revenge was that I had taken everything he tried to crush in me, my independence, my confidence, my ambition, and turned it into power. And there was nothing he could do to take that away. Months passed, and the storm of the divorce slowly faded into background noise. Michael tried to fight pieces of the settlement at first, filing petty motions, but each one was dismissed. He had no leverage anymore, and he knew it. Eventually, even his messages stopped. The silence was louder than all his laughter had ever been. Meanwhile, my life took on a rhythm that felt wholly mine. I moved out of that sterile apartment and bought a place that reflected who I truly was, warm, colorful, filled with books and plants, not a showroom for status. Every corner of it whispered freedom. Sometimes late at night, I would sit on the porch with a glass of wine and think back to the girl I used to be, the one who believed expensive dinners meant love, who mistook control for guidance, who thought silence was the price of peace. I wanted to hug her, tell her she wasn't weak. She was waiting for the moment she would finally step into her own strength. One Saturday morning, while grocery shopping, I ran into one of Michael's former colleagues. He looked startled at first, then gave me a smile. "Sarah, I have to say, everyone at the firm is still talking about you. You showed all of us that Michael Shannon wasn't the smartest person in the room, after all." I laughed softly, shaking my head. It was never about being the smartest. It was about refusing to stay small. Driving home with bags of fresh fruit in the back seat, I realized I no longer thought of Michael with anger. He was just a chapter. A loud, painful chapter, yes, but one that pushed me toward the life I was meant to live. And when people ask about my divorce, I don't tell them about the courtroom or the shouting. I tell them about the moment the judge read my financials aloud. The moment Michael's laugh disappeared. The moment I realized I didn't just survive, I won. Not against him, but for myself. Because the greatest fortune I built wasn't the business, the properties, or the millions. It was the unshakable knowledge that I never needed him to define me. And I never will again.